Hi everybody, I'm out in the woods. My computer's sitting on a rock. Let's talk about humility. Today's question comes from the song Sigh No More by Mumford & Sons. Can you kneel before the king and say, I'm clean, I'm clean? When I came here a couple of videos back, I asked why I was here, and the answer was to kneel. And then I asked, what does it mean to kneel? And I've grown in my understanding of the answer to that question, I believe, and so I'm going to talk about that today. So the question today is, can you kneel before the king and say, I'm clean? But it's also the question, what does it mean to kneel, and how do you kneel? If the recipient doesn't mind, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a letter that I wrote. I don't think I am kneeling. I think I lack the humility to regard myself as nothing, as an empty vessel, and therefore cannot be filled. This also has to do with what I was saying about being able to connect ideas, but not connecting them to a person or to a life. I make connections, and, well, I'm pretty good at it, but it is this desire to figure everything out, and this pride in thinking that I can figure everything out. Well, I'm pretty good at it. I'm a little ashamed of writing that, but only because I think so highly of myself. I can't talk about this humbly because I am not humble, and that's the problem. It is this pride in thinking I can figure God out, that I can figure even myself out, that I could possibly accept God on my terms that prevents me from accepting the terms God gives me, unconditional surrender. I have not the humility to surrender my intellect to God and so cannot kneel. What does it mean to kneel? To kneel is to humble yourself. It is a surrender, a emptying of the self. Andrew Murray writes in his book, Humility, "This is the true self-denial to which our Savior calls us, the acknowledgement that self has nothing good in it, except as an empty vessel for God to fill. Its claim to be or do anything may not for a moment be allowed. It is in this, above and before everything, that the conformity to Jesus consists, the being and doing nothing of ourselves, that God may be all in all." There's a further line in the song Sigh No More which says, "Lead me to the truth, and I will follow you with my whole life." Humility is more than just one time. It's not an act, the act of kneeling down. You have to stay kneeling. You have to stay humble. I wrote this down because it's confusing. The life of humility is constantly emptying the self of the self, so that the self may be filled with the self it was established to be, which is holiness. Humility, or kneeling, is a life devoted to being nothing, so that God can be everything and fill you with himself, which is the self that you are supposed to become, which is holiness. It's a change of focus from the focus of everything being in relation to me to everything being in relation to God. Essentially, when I make myself nothing, I can't define things in terms of myself because there is no self to define them in terms of. I have to make God everything and define everything in terms of God. Except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. T.S. Eliot. The geocentric model for our solar system, which Copernicus disproved, put the Earth at the center of our solar system and the planets and sun circling around it. But with that model, the orbits of the planets had to be radically changed so that they were spinning in smaller circles and in bigger circles in order to account for the variances in the observations we made about their orbit. But with the heliocentric model, everything makes sense because everything is moving in an ordered pattern around the sun, and our observations, once we understand that they're not moving around us but around the sun, make much more sense, make sense. Except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. When we make ourselves geocentric, when we make ourselves the reference point, or that still point, nothing makes sense. All our observations just look like everything is madness. But when we make God heliocentric, that reference point, that still point, which he is, absolute truth, which he is that still point. When we make God that still point, we can observe in relation to him the dance and see that it is in fact a dance and not incoherent and crazed movement. Can you kneel before the king and say, I'm clean? I'm clean. I don't know. There are these ideas that I want to express that I can't put words to. It's very frustrating. On our own, nobody can kneel before the king. We are too self-centered and too broken to empty ourselves so that God can fill us. And the only person, human being, who ever was humble, who ever humbled himself, even unto death, was Christ. He made his will nothing so that God's will could be enacted through him. And it is only through God's mercy and through the substitution of Jesus that we can become humble, and that we can kneel, and that we can pray, not my will, but yours be done. And in that, we can kneel before the King and say, I'm clean, I'm clean.